In July 1627, the people of Haimai aimed their cannons at the harbor. They thought they knew where the enemy would land. The cliffs around the island ruled out most of the coast. The harbor was the obvious approach. They had a few small cannon, a few muskets, limited powder, and the sense that visible defense at the obvious point might be enough. They were wrong. The Algerian raiders did not need the harbor. They landed where the islanders were not watching, spread through the farms and caves, and searched until they found people. By the time the ships left, nearly 400 Icelanders were gone. Not killed in battle, but priced in a market across the sea. This is the case Iceland calls Tyrkjaranid, the Turkish raid of 1627. The public version tells one story. A Dutch-born corsair, Jan Janszoon of Haarlem, known in North Africa as Murat Reis the Younger, who sailed farther north than Barbary raiders were supposed to go. The records tell a harder one. Murat Reis mattered. But the raid was not made possible by one man. It was made possible by an Atlantic-Mediterranean circuit that could turn distance, poor coastal defense, wartime distraction, and human ransom into a calculation. The question is not how Barbary corsairs reached Iceland. The question is why the voyage made economic sense at all. The 1627 raid was not one expedition, it was two. Icelandic and modern scholarship distinguish them, and the exact connection between them is not fully clear in the surviving record. The first ships came from Salé on the Moroccan Atlantic coast. They reached the southwest of Iceland in June and attacked Grindavík. The second ships came from Algiers. They reached the eastern coast in early July and moved north and west, ending at the Westman Islands. That distinction matters because public memory tends to fuse them into a single Murat Reis raid. The records do not. Start with Salé. A single vessel appeared near Grindavík in June 1627. Grindavík was a fishing and trading settlement on an island whose defenses were thin, wet, and scattered. Iceland belonged to the Danish crown, but Denmark was tied down in the 30 Years' War. The island was a fishing ground and a colony. It did not have a defense system built for Atlantic corsair raids. The Salé raiders took roughly 15 Icelanders and a similar number of Dutch and Danish sailors, along with a Danish merchant vessel. They tried the political center at Bessastaðir, but there the governor and the people around him staged enough resistance to make the attackers hesitate. One corsair vessel grounded on a reef. The risk rose. The Salé ship left. If this were only Murat Reis's story, the raid would end there. A cautious attack, a small group of captives, a stolen merchant ship, and a return to Morocco. That small outcome is one reason the surface story misleads. The Grindavík raid gives the famous name. The East Fjords and Haimai give the scale. 2 weeks later, ships from Algiers appeared on the eastern coast of Iceland. Their attack moved from farm to farm along the East Fjords. People fled where they could. The corsairs took around 110 captives, then turned toward the Westman Islands. On Haimai, the contemporary report records the dates as 17 to 19 July 1627. It also records the detail that matters for the structure of the attack. The raiders did not strike one visible target and leave. They spread through the island. They searched houses, farms, cliffs, caves, and hiding places where fish and people could be concealed. A quick raid for goods can stop at the warehouses. A raid for captives has to search the island. The Algerian contingent took 234 people from the Westman Islands. The exact command structure behind those ships remains less clear in the surviving record than popular tellings often admit. Icelandic sources generally connect Murat Reis with the Salé attack on Grindavík. The larger Algerian raid is a separate operation whose link to the Salé voyage is uncertain. That uncertainty does not weaken the case. It is the case, because the better question is what connected Salé, Algiers, Denmark's Icelandic colony, and the slave market strongly enough that ships could sail to the edge of the North Atlantic and expect a return. The answer becomes visible through one captive. Among the people taken from Haimai was Reverend Ólafur Egilsson, a Lutheran minister in his 60s. He was captured with members of his family. After he reached Algiers, his captors did something the legend does not foreground. They released him, not as mercy, as an instrument of a ransom economy. Ólafur was sent to travel through Europe, reach Denmark, and ask the king for ransom money. He left Algiers with safe conduct, crossed the Mediterranean, moved through Italy and France, reached Holland and then Denmark. He did not return with ransom money. Denmark's war costs and empty treasury made the mission fail. He came back to Iceland alone in July 1628, less than a year after his capture, and wrote down what he had seen. His account is the case's spine. In Algiers, Ólafur describes the Icelanders being marched through the city and put into a stone market space. People from East Iceland were sold first. The people from the Westman Islands followed. Hands and faces were inspected. A distribution rule applied. The local ruler took a share before the remaining captives were divided among ship owners and the men who made the voyage. The raid did not end when the ships left Iceland. The raid was completed in the market. The captives became labor, property, ransom claims, and letters. One of those letters, written in 1631 by Guðrúður Hallsson, gives the route after capture in a few hard coordinates. The ships left the Westman Islands in July. After more than 3 weeks with following winds, the captives reached Algiers on 12th of August. Guðrúður writes of 3 ships and 400 Icelandic people aboard. That figure is not a clean census of the whole event. Other sources speak of close to 400 or over 400. The safe statement is that nearly 400 people were taken from Iceland in the raids of 1627, most of them by the Algerian expedition. Now the word Turkish needs care. Icelandic memory calls the event Tyrkjaranid, the Turkish raid or Turkish abductions. In 17th century Northern Europe, Turk could mean Ottoman, Muslim, North African, convert, or enemy from the Mediterranean world. It did not necessarily mean an ethnic Turk from Anatolia. In this case, the raiders included people tied to Morocco, Algiers, European converts, and probably mixed crews. Calling the raid Turkish without explanation hides the system. It turns a multi-ethnic Atlantic Mediterranean corsair economy into a single ethnic label. The records do not support that simplification. Now place Murat Reis back where the sources can hold him. He was born Jan Janszoon in Haarlem around 1570. Dutch and later sources connect him to privateering before his North African career. He was captured by Barbary corsairs around 1618, converted to Islam, and became known as Murat Reis. By the 1620s, he was linked to Salé's corsair fleet. Salé was not a normal pirate hideout in the simple sense. It was an Atlantic corsair city at the mouth of the Bou Regreg, tied to Morocco, tied by personnel and commerce to Algiers, and shaped by Morisco refugees expelled from Spain, European converts, ship owners, and shifting local political bargains. Modern historians describe it as semi-autonomous, sometimes close to a city-state, sometimes operating inside the claims of larger rulers. That ambiguity mattered. A corsair could use the authority of a port, a ruler, a flag, a treaty gap, or a war. The same ship could look like a private enterprise in one document and a political instrument in another. Salé's power was not that it erased law, it was that it could move between legal languages faster than its targets could respond. The useful fact about Murat Reis is not that a Dutchman changed sides. The useful fact is that European maritime skill, North African ports, Morisco political grievances, and Mediterranean ransom markets could combine inside one command economy. Murat Reis did not have to invent that economy. He operated inside it. Thorstein Helgason's modern Icelandic scholarship argues for Salé as the inception point and Murat Reis as central to the idea of a northern voyage. That is a serious reading. The exact connection between the Salé and Algerian expeditions remains uncertain in the sources. The honest version keeps both things in view. Murat Reis as a likely architect or initiator of the northern voyage, and the Algerian expedition as the force that caused the largest part of the human loss. That is not a weaker story, it is a more accurate one. For the people taken in 1627, the case continued for years. Ransom money was collected through the Danish realm. Dutch merchants became useful intermediaries because Denmark had limited experience operating in the Mediterranean ransom market. After 9 years, 34 people were ransomed from Algiers. Only 27 of them reached Iceland. The others died on the return journey or were lost along the route. A later group of 8 was ransomed in 1645, 16 years after the raid, and 7 years after the first wave reached home. For the families left behind in Iceland, those years were not a story. They were a weight. Money was collected church by church across the Danish realm. Letters traveled south. Most letters returned without answers. Children captured at Jaime in 1627 were adults by the time the first ransom returns arrived. Some of those returns brought a parent home to a country where the spouse and the other children had been gone for nearly a decade. The arithmetic is the case's hardest fact. Of nearly 400 people taken, the documented returns are measured in dozens, not hundreds. Most did not return. One anonymous captive letter, preserved in Ólafur's collection, turns the aftermath against the rescuers. The writer complains that people who arrived in Algiers with ransom money used it for trade and left captives behind with promises. Whether every accusation in that letter can be independently checked is not the point for narration. The point is that the captives understood the ransom system as another market in which they could be failed. The raid made people into goods. The ransom made hope into a second transaction. That is the case's hardest economic fact. The final answer is not that the raid was inevitable. It was not. Bessa Stader shows that local geography and visible resistance could change the calculation. The governor's house had stone defenses, a corsair vessel grounded on a reef during the approach. Uncertainty about English ships in nearby waters added to the calculation. The Salé raiders left with a few captives instead of attacking the political center. A different defense outcome was possible, but Jaime shows the other side. The islanders made the defensive choice that made sense from what they knew. They guarded the obvious landing. They expected the harbor to be the problem. The raiders made the island the problem. Once the landing succeeded, defense built around an approach could not protect every house, cave, and path. The ledger in Algiers then completed what the map began. This is the author's reading. The longest voyage frame matters only because the economics at the end of the voyage made the distance thinkable. Salé and Algiers did not need Iceland to be rich in silver. They needed Icelanders to be convertible into labor, ransom, and shares. The raid did not begin when ships appeared off Iceland. It began when North Atlantic distance met a Mediterranean market that already knew how to price human captivity. Most of the people taken in 1627 never came home. Murat Reis was the name that made the story travel. The system was what made the ships sail. Visual reconstructions are AI-assisted and based on historical records.